Results of last night's local by-election are making grim reading for Tory supporters, with Labour winning both votes.
Yeah, the Conservatives lost majorities of 24,000 in mid-Bedfordshire and 19,000 in Tamworth.
Joining us now is Conservative Health Minister Maria Caulfield. Maria, no matter how you spin this, it was a terrible night for the Conservatives.
Yeah, it's obviously disappointing results, but I think by-elections are always difficult, particularly for parties who are in government. And if you look at the results for both of them, the main overwhelming result really was that Conservative voters stayed at home. Labour actually lost votes in mid-Bedfordshire and only gained a small increase in Tamworth. So, there is a lot of work to do, but actually what voters are saying to us, and in by-elections, they can easily, send a message to government without having Keir Starmer as their Prime Minister. It's often the case that changes when a general election comes.
Well, absolutely. But if Conservative voters are staying at home, Rishi Sunak keeps saying, judge me by my actions. He said, I'm going to halve inflation, not happen. Grow the economy, not happen. Debt falling, not happening. Waiting lists, that's very much your brief. The waiting lists, the lists are appalling. We haven't stopped the small boats. Is it any wonder Conservatives are staying at home?
Well, we are making progress on inflation. Rishi's aim is to halve inflation, and we are on track to do that. It isn't, has reduced significantly. If you look at waiting lists, actually what's important to most patients is not who else is on the waiting list, it's how long they're having to wait. And we have significantly reduced the waiting time. It was, this time last year, it was 2 years wait for procedures. It's now down to just roughly around a year, with further progress to be made, but much better than Labour are doing, where they run the health service in Wales. And of course, the small boats is a priority. We've got the case at the moment over the Rwanda deportations. Sir Keir Starmer has been clear that he would reverse any progress we make on that. And that will be the choice that people have to make at the general election. It wasn't the choice they had to make last night.
Can I just put to you the words of Professor Sir John Curtice, the election analyst professor, who said that the last time there were 3 by-election swings over 20%, he's including Selby in that, was in the run-up to 1997. We heard from John Rentoul earlier on the programme that this looks like the second coming of Blairism. And you are, in truth, staring defeat in the face in 12 months' time, whenever that election might come.
Well, if you look at 3 previous by-elections before general elections, Brecon and Radnorshire is a classic example where before 2019 we lost that by-election, and literally a few weeks later, when the 2019 election was called, we won that back with a healthy majority. The same for Kelly Tolhurst in Rochester and Stroud. She lost that by-election to UKIP and then won it at the next general election. The same for Paul Bristow in Peterborough. So by-elections are very different to general elections. People are able to send a message to government when they're not happy, and then that is very different to electing a Labour government come a general election. And people have reason to be unhappy. Since 2019, we've had 2 years of COVID where people have struggled and are still feeling the effects, as David, you said, with things like waiting lists. And then very swiftly after that, we've had Ukraine invaded by Russia, and the impact that's had on everyone's purse strings, with the increase in cost of energy and inflation. And so times have been tough.
There were certainly extraneous factors, but at the same time, this is about your management of this country. Now, we've got Conservative MPs saying that the Conservatives have to make radical change if they stand any chance of winning the next general election. How do the Conservatives actually turn this around, or is it game over?
Well, no, I think Rishi's been pretty clear about how he's going to do that. He's set out his 5 priorities. Inflation is one of those, and we are making progress, and we still are on track to halve inflation. Stopping the boats is his key priority, and we're in the courts at the moment trying to get those Rwanda deportations off the ground. We have actually reduced those illegal boats by about 26% this year. That's still not enough, and we're hamstrung at every opportunity by those who are trying to stop us. And if you look at waiting lists, yes, the waiting list is growing, but actually the time people are waiting for procedures and operations is falling. And they're the messages we need to get out to people. People need to feel the difference rather than just hear politicians talking about the difference. And that's the PM's focus. He wants to deliver on that so that people feel the impact.
With the greatest of respect, the lived experience of patients is they can't see a GP, they can't get the treatment they want. The waiting lists are going up. Our outcomes in this country are appalling. appalling. Our cancer survival rates lower than the rest of Europe. It has to be turned round.
Yeah, but if you look at some of the achievements which the media don't cover, if you look at HIV, for example, since when I was a nurse and before we came into government, people were dying of AIDS. Now people can live a long and happy life with HIV because we've introduced opt-out testing, we've introduced the PrEP medication. If you look at cervical cancer, with our vaccination program of teenage boys and girls, we are on track to eradicate cervical cancer. There's some really good positive stories, but they often don't make the headlines. And you're right, though, people have to feel that difference. But we had a debate yesterday on baby loss, and Sherilyn McCrory, the MP down in Cornwall, said there is now a waiting list for trainees to join to become midwives. That's a real success story, but you won't hear about that in the news.
Maria, you listed a whole host of issues that have led to voters feeling disenchanted with the Conservative Party, from coronavirus, the cost of living crisis. But what about the individuals? It is a year to the day since Liz Truss resigned. Rishi Sunak then taking the top job. Does he have to face up to his responsibility on this, that voters just aren't voting with him? And voters are fed up of the mess of the Tory party, from Boris Johnson, from Partygate to Liz Truss, and now Rishi Sunak.
Well, if you look where Labour is in power, actually we won the Uxbridge by-election because once people have experienced Labour running services, they're pretty cheesed off. And yes, they're fed up with us because we've had, as David said, extraordinary circumstances from pandemic to war to deal with in a very short space of time. And no matter how we've tried to support people, whether that's with furlough or with paying roughly half of people's energy bills, that's still been difficult for people to manage. But if you look in Wales, Mark Drayford's polling is falling and dropping like a stone because people see the difference that Labour make in terms of introducing 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, around the way that they spend people's taxes. And so people are frustrated and have sent us a clear message last night, but they didn't go out and vote for Labour. The Labour vote in mid-Bedfordshire actually fell and only increased slightly in Tamworth. The Conservative voters stayed at home, and that was to send us a message. When they actually have to choose a government, they will have to make that decision who they want to run the country.